Colonel John Alexander is back tonight, having produced a very controversial and fascinating book called UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. This is a hardcover book and is getting a lot of attention, a lot of talk. But how long have you been involved or interested in the UFO phenomenon?
See, 1947?
Roswell.
Certainly started before Roswell. As soon as they saw the, quote, flying saucers. And there was a fair amount of press at that time, and I was 10, and certainly got my attention.
Roswell wasn't known about until many years later, but the issue of UFOs was heavily covered in the press when you were a kid in the 50s and 60s, and even into the 70s, and then it kind of disappeared. Why did the press, knowing full well they can report on Charlie Sheen and all the rest of them and sell papers, but they dropped the issue of UFOs when our media is steeped in UFOs and alien movies and TV series and dramas and all the rest of it? Why did the press stop covering the UFO story? And it's a big, big story. Now, I've had people try to report to newspapers sightings, and they've been told flat out that we have been told we do not cover this issue anymore. What's behind that, John, in your estimation?
It's toxic. Well, it is for anybody who gets involved. People ask why I wrote the book, and I say, well, I'm a masochist, and I want to get beat up once in a while. No, certainly for any politician, any scientist. Well, what you have to understand is I'm sure your listening audience has intense interest, but they are a tiny, tiny minority compared to the vast majority of people.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Average people are interested and believe in UFOs. I mean, like 70% believe.
Right.
But they're not terribly interested. It doesn't affect their life. And
really? Now, what changed, though, between... there were a lot of newspapers sold in the 50s and 60s and early 70s on the basis of tremendously vivid sighting reports. That's a fact. Now, what you're suggesting here is that people have changed and they become blasé about it.
Pretty much. For the average person, it just doesn't have much impact on their life.
Well,
a lot of things happen in the print media over that time as well.
All right. A big movie is opening Friday night, I guess, or maybe Thursday. It's called Battle L.A.
Right.
Yet another E.T. invasion, and it'll do very well at the box office, like most of them do.
I'm not sure, but
well, we'll see. I mean,
I've heard from people who've seen it. They kind of went,
I'm sure it's another dog. I mean, let's be honest. How many times can you destroy Los Angeles with evil ETs and get people to go to the box office and fork out $15 or $20?
Yeah. Well, it's heavy CGI.
Well,
I think the one to watch is going to be Cowboys and Aliens, because they brought in the A-Team for that.
When's that due out?
July.
Okay, is that the Spielberg one?
Well,
he's behind.
It was created by Scott Rosenberg.
Okay, well, Spielberg's got a big one coming out this summer. There's a trailer out online.
He was an executive producer on it.
Well, maybe is this the one that occurred in the 80s or something? There's the one I saw the trailer of is on the internet now. Someone will email it to me. I'll send it to you. It's a Spielberg production, and it took place in the 80s, I think, maybe the 70s. It's a bit of a time.
This is the 1800s.
Oh, that sounds like a good one.
It is. Harrison Ford, Daniel Craig, like I said, the A-list guys.
Oh, there you go. I knew nothing about it. Okay, well, that one and Spielberg's big one, which I guess has an Area 51 backdrop to it in part. But anyway, there's more on the way. The point of all this is the culture we live in is loaded with ET, UFO screenplays.
Sure.
Whether they're television or motion pictures, it doesn't matter. Now, the suggestion here, though, is that our newspapers aren't going to cover that issue anymore as being reported, and they're...
Well, the problem is, again, it's toxic even for them, and they always go ho, ho, ho. Wink, wink at the end of the thing. They'll put up, brief things on sightings, and then a couple of days later, the sighting was explained, even if it wasn't. Here's the Bentwaters case is kind of a classic one there. But
what do you think of the Bentwaters case?
I think it's a great case. I think it's one of the best that have come along.
Mm-hmm.
And that over time, most of the cases over time get weaker. This is one that seems to get stronger and stronger.
Have you talked to Charles Holt?
I saw Chuck this past weekend.
Good guy, everyone says. Hey, very sincere.
Some people think it was a big deal for him and almost helped get him promoted. In fact, he'll tell you it almost got him derailed. And from a personnel perspective, it was certainly not career enhancing for the rest of the people involved. Yeah, but they got about 80 witnesses. I happen to believe Jim Peniston when I first talked to him, and he says, "Oh, you mean the one I touched?" Where he actually walked up, put his hands on it.
On the craft, whatever it was.
And you have the pod, where it landed, and radiation and all that. But when I said the press, if you'll remember, it was only a short time ago, like within the last month, they were hitting the press that said, maybe it was an Apollo capsule that dropped down.
Excuse me?
And you go, this makes no sense whatsoever, but the press picked it up.
Well,
it was supposed to be a training capsule for Apollo that was being dragged along and fell off. You go, it just doesn't even begin to fit the facts.
No.
It gets reported as such.
Of course. That's too bad. Well, the press is not what it used to be, that's for damn sure. You said something, and I've forgotten where I've read it. Might have been the Popular Mechanics brief article about you in the book. But you said, look, we've already had the government at the highest levels weigh in on this thing. And you mentioned Truman, I think, quoting, and you mentioned, did you mention Eisenhower? Can you reiterate that for us, please?
Sure. Day one has happened. Everybody's talking, when's the announcement from the White House going to happen? Day one happened. It happened, and Truman came out and said, these things are real, and they don't come from Earth.
So Truman said this.
Yeah. The point is, it was greeted with a gigantic ho-hum.
Well, that's pretty amazing, because it's a stunning statement. Obviously, he said it with full intent to have people listen and believe him. But you're right, that is day one. And there's more to it than that.
You had, as you know, a lot of other presidents. Carter reported one. We know that.
Yep. Ronald Reagan. Yep.
Who's now Reagan's revered as a god will help. He was in a plane and chased one.
What did you think of Leslie's book?
I thought she did a really good job. She edited 19 co-authors and first persons that, in fact, I was working on the book kind of in parallel. I knew she was a little bit ahead of me, but we had chosen many of the same cases because they're the ones that stand up to scrutiny.
Hal Puthoff wrote a very, very nice review of your book. I'm going to read that to everyone because Hal's credentials are obviously extraordinary. He said, Colonel Alexander's data-rich book is a must-read by anyone with even a passing curiosity about UFOs and the government's involvement and knowledge of this controversial subject. Authored by a well-connected government insider with decades of access to senior military and civilian leaders and who convened a highly classified, officially sanctioned UFO study group, Colonel Alexander provides a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look at the intricate government/intelligence/military-industrial complex structure that emerges from his careful study. With candor and meticulous attention to detail, Colonel Alexander shares his personal odyssey to determine the ground truth reality concerning the UFO enigma and the government's role in it. The verdict? On the one hand, he finds that our nation's best defense assets unequivocally confirm the existence of UFOs as physical objects of extraordinary performance capability, apparently intelligently controlled. On the other hand, he also deconstructs many of the field's most vaunted myths and conspiracies that have grown up around this controversial and contentious topic. Believers and skeptics alike will thus find much here to challenge a priori assumptions. Hal Puthoff, Ph.D., Director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. So very well done, John. That's a glowing review from a great man.
And folks should know, he is a personal friend and was involved in some of those studies. So.
All right. So you validate 43 cases, and as I just read from Hal Puthoff's glowing review, you have made no bones about it, that the top intelligence and defense people know there's something going on.
We have had, interactions with strategic systems. Basically, every sensor system we have picks them up.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, they say, well, we're the Department of Defense, not a threat. We do threats.
So that's how they wash their hands of it. They declare it a non-threatening issue, and therefore they're not interested in it.
Well, pretty much. It was, that happened with the Condon report. And in a way, Condon was right. Because the question to him was not, are there UFOs? It was, is this a threat? He said, not a threat. Mm-hmm. Haven't been invaded, so you'd have to say that piece at least was correct. For those who wonder what my position is, you'll note that Jacques Vallée did the foreword for the book.
Yes.
And in this area, he and I think a lot alike.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with Burt Rutan?
Sure.
He said, sure. There's
no,
not a lot
I know.
of people who aren't. And I was quite surprised that he actually provided an introduction to this.
Really?
For those who don't know, he is, an aerospace giant, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Recently won the X Prize for the first civilian company to put in a man into space.
Very gutsy man. Yeah.
And but in the intro, he actually tells about his own sighting. So that's pretty brave for him to step forward
mm-hmm.
and say, I saw one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard for the skeptics to take on when, one of their legends comes in and says, yep, that was real. Then, of course,
Indeed.
Tom Clancy did some commentary as well. So,
well, it's a book that's going to be hopefully widely read, and I assume its sales are good already. It's seemingly got a lot of attention on the net.